now that the All-Pro, LCS All-Pro for spring has been announced, it was revealed. So I want to talk through the results and how my ballot played into that, reveal what my ballot was. You guys can see all the ballots if you go to the article and look it up. And you scroll down a bit and you can see there's a list to the ballots, and you can see what everybody voted. You got to flip the PDF around a little bit and zoom in a bunch and do a bunch of horizontal scrolling. That's really awkward, but it's there. You can find it. So I'll make it a little easier. And I'll just show what I actually voted for and explain a little bit. I'm not going to talk through all 15 votes, but the ones that I think people might have some questions about or some differences of opinion on. I do want to say that, as I've been saying on Twitter this morning, I'm pretty impressed with the improvement over past years and past splits of the legitimacy of the voting. In the past, we had, the media, I think, is always taking it relatively seriously, but but we'd have coaches or we'd have the player representatives from the teams kind of really throw some votes away, do some fun things with it, clearly treat it as like not something that really mattered. And sometimes you'd even see them trying to game the system. They can't vote for someone from their own team, so they'll vote for people who they know aren't going to get a lot of votes, so that their own teammate or even themselves, is more likely to win. I didn't really see that this time around. I think there might be a little bit hidden under the fringes of stuff if you dig really hard, but I think most of it, or pretty much all of it, can be defended on some level at least, which is a big improvement, and I'm impressed by that, and I'm glad. So shout outs to the LCS teams and the players and the coaches for improving their take on the All-Pro voting. So putting all that aside, I am going to show what my ballot was. So here is my ballot for the LCS 2021 Spring All-Pro teams. So on first team, I voted Alfari, Blabber, Perks, FBI, Core JJ. On second team, I voted Impact, Santorin, Jizuke, Sven, and Vulcan. And on third team, I voted for Fake God, Spica, Power Evil, Neo, and Aframu. So, I think there are some of these that people might disagree with. The ones that, when I was putting this together, the ones that kind of stood out to me the most is like, I'm probably going to be pretty alone on this one and might get some people asking questions. I thought Fake God, but it turned out quite a few people put Fake God in their third team, which is cool to see. That means he was getting recognized. I think there are definitely people out there who would have put Neo higher, but I can in a minute I can go through my reasoning for having him on third team, not first or second. Spica could have gone either way a little. The rest of it I think is pretty straightforward, and it's just a matter of like who are your top four, and then what order do you put them in, so who gets left out, right? So let's start at the top. I think nobody's going to have questions about Alfari and Blabber. Given that they've been leading all the conversation on MVP, it shouldn't be surprising at all that they both landed first team. I was back and forthing over the past couple weeks about Alfari and Impact, but as the season wrapped up and I went through and just thought about, what constitutes an All-Pro, and that is much more about just personal skill and execution to me, compared to an MVP where I tend to approach it a little more from the value to the team and overall contributions and things like that, not just how good you are as an individual player. I think the conversation gets a little more subtle there. But for an All-Pro, I think, it didn't take me too long to decide that Alfari was my All-Pro above Impact. Blabber, I think, is a no-brainer. Perks, I think there are definitely some opinions out there. Some people put PoE first. Some people dropped Jizuke outside of their top four and slotted in Jensen. I think I saw Soligo on third team. I think there are different ways you can go with this. I will say that I don't think any mid laner in the LCS was clearly head and shoulders above and screamed out, I am the first team mid laner. The reason I put Perks here is because I think when he was doing the right things at the right times, it was very clear he's so superior in skill. And there were times when he would make some inting plays. I think everybody remembers very recently the Azir play in mid lane that had no real purpose to it, and he was just trying to create something out of nothing. But I think when Perks was making those plays, it was very clearly a bit of a limit test, and him playing a little loose, things like that. They had a different kind of tenor to the mistakes than some other players and some of the other mistakes they would make. You'd have the kinds of mistakes Jizuke would make in the first half of the split where, the tower dives and things like that, where it's like, okay, clearly there's nothing there. You're trying to force something that didn't exist. You're just not paying attention to what's around you. I don't think those weren't the kinds of mistakes I saw from Perks. It was, I wonder if I can create something here, and if my team's ready for it, it's going to work, kind of thing. And the team just wasn't quite with him. Those were more of like how I internalized Perks' mistakes, and I'm more willing to kind of forgive those and say like, no, he was a really good player. He just, he wasn't quite in sync with the rest of his team in some of these. He was trying a little bit to be too stylish. He wasn't inting so much as trying to humiliate people, and it backfired. Which is, there's a little bit of difference to that. In either case, it's a mistake. And if he cleaned up a few of those, that would have been a much more obvious, I think, first team. But I do think that he was the best performing overall. People will call out Power of Evil, I think, as being another candidate here. I had a lot of issues, especially the first 4 weeks with Power of Evil's early game. With his lack of stepping anywhere outside of his lane to contribute or being in sync with his team. I think in the last couple of weeks, we saw a lot better synchronization between Power of Evil and Spica, trying to control vision around the mid lane or in the jungle entrances, being aware of kind of the early game pressure points that were being created and how he needed to either cover for them or contribute to them, depending, which direction that was going. I think I saw a big improvement for that. But over the entire course of the split, there were far too many gaps in that part of his play that I had a hard time overlooking for an all-pro vote. I think he was a really great team fighter late on, and that's what kind of put me into this position for him. But I think both Perks and Jizuke to me were much better at taking control of the game and asserting themselves and putting them out there. And yeah, Power of Evil didn't do that for me as much. Much more of a safe play, a narrow style of control mages, and be a good team fighter. And being really good at one thing is not what puts it on the first team for me. So that's how I ended up on Perks. FBI in the bot lane, I think you could go either FBI or Sven and be pretty reasonable and have a good argument for it. I think FBI was a little more of he was the primary, he was by far the most consistent player in his team and the player who had the most good games and didn't really throw games away. Obviously in lane, he is a total monster. In team fighting, I think there are some ADs that were a little better than him at team fighting. I think you can definitely shout out Neo's team fighting this split. But I think FBI was the star of his team. 100 Thieves won when they made FBI, the way they were going to win. When they tried to play through Someday, it didn't really work. Not necessarily all on Someday's fault, but more about, the way the team was able to coordinate topside pressure. But when they allowed FBI and Huhi to be their main pressure point and carry through the game the rest of the way, FBI really, really shone there. And I think that's he was a little more solid and impressive to me than Sven. I think, when you do look at Sven, he was just overall really good. I don't think I need to defend too much putting him here. Neo, I think a very similar story to PoE. Both of them had really, really strong late games and some really big carry performances in team fighting and so on. But both of them really struggled to take control of the laning phase. And so it wasn't enough of an overall comprehensive performance to me to put them higher in my votes. Core JJ is one that, I wonder if there's a bit of voter fatigue on Core JJ. I know there are a lot of people out there saying that, people only voted for Core JJ because he's been so good in the past, but he wasn't that good this split. You know what? I think there's a mix of voter fatigue on Core JJ and narrative pressure on Alfari. And then every time you talk about Team Liquid, all anybody can talk about is, look how amazing Alfari is, and look how much tactical gets caught and gets picked off. And I think that really misses the point when you go back and look at how their games played out and what was successful for them. It missed how much Core JJ achieved with his movements around their map. He still continues to be an incredible engager. he would run up to the top side of the map so often and cover Alfari crashing waves, gank for him, just straight up gank for him and feed him lane control or kills or whatever else. And I think Core JJ was really, in a strange way, went a little under the radar this split. I think he was really fantastic. And, you know, I saw a different level of his play than I think a lot of other people did who were expecting, you know, MVP Core JJ. And I don't, you know, I think you can have him in the MVP conversation, but I think he wasn't as standout head and shoulders above the rest of the league as he was back in summer 2020. And I think that made it a little bit harder to recognize. Plus the fact that Team Liquid were playing through the top side, and Core JJ was a big part of them playing through the top side. But compared to when you're playing through the bottom side like they were in the past, it's that much easier to recognize the quality of a support because the camera is centered on him so much more often. So I think Core JJ was great. I think he was the best support in the league in this split, even though his level of play may have dipped a little bit from summer 2020, but I don't think it dipped that much. On the second team front, I've talked a little bit about bot and mid already. I think Santorin was just really solid, as always. Really solid, doesn't make many mistakes, doesn't put himself out there quite as much as Blabber, and force things or create things out of nothing compared to what Blabber did. But I think, he was really good. The other candidates that might have gone up there, Spica, I think some people would look at Dardoch. And I think it's a little hard for me to put... Spica had too many down points. Some off games, things like that. But he had a lot of positive moments too. I think Spica can be a better jungler than Santorin, but I don't think he was so far this split. I think Dardoch is one who, like the rest of Dignitas, like my classification of Dignitas is very, finding ways to win in late game team fights, finding ways to get big objective steals, but not taking over and controlling the game from the early game onwards, which this is all revealing, if anything, a bit of an analytical bias in my mind that I really value, that ability to control the game and to be in charge of it rather than letting the game come to you and scaling up and team fighting later. And so I think, Dardoch was part of that. I don't think he controlled the game as much. I don't think he was as assertive as some of the other junglers who I put above him. So those would be my takes on Santorin and Spica. Now, Impact and Fake God, I think there are going to be a lot of different takes on this one. I don't think Impact is controversial. I don't know. Maybe you guys think it is, but but I think that's a pretty straightforward one. I think he had a great split. I think he showed another side to himself. Fake God is one where I didn't go into this originally having him as high on my list. I think top lane was a very contested position this split. I think Huni got the official selection for third team. And, there are definitely arguments for that. I think you can argue Someday into that position. I think for Someday, it's more on, I have a different take on how good Someday is versus how well he performed this spring. I think he is probably a better player than Fake God for now. But I think Fake God performed better this split. I think Someday had a tough time connecting with his team. And they had a tough time incorporating him properly. I think Fake God, when I went back and reviewed all my notes, and I did a video earlier this week about the kind of note taking that I have and that I do and the way I review it. When I went back and reviewed that, I had so many notes just about every game about Fake God doing small, subtle things that helped the team, and then every now and then a big shining moment. He had that huge Gnar game, but aside from those, he didn't throw things. He was, put in vulnerable positions a lot and didn't give up too much. He just did so many things right that I think are a little hard to recognize, and the things that are more likely to be found when you keep track of how he's actually playing in the subtle moments, and then put it all together and paint the overall picture. So when I reviewed those notes, it became pretty clear to me, I had a generally positive impression of how he played, and I just realized, wait, he's been doing so much more than I had actually kind of thought. So I felt pretty good about putting Fake God there, and when I looked at the rest of the ballots, lots of other people put Fake God in third team too. I think I've talked about pretty much everyone here. Aframu, I think, was another kind of shout out to Dignitas for, his ability to kind of marshal them in the late game, be a big playmaker for the team. I'm making a little bit of assumption on kind of leadership presence and things like that it's hard to know without actually hearing team comms or being in the house or anything like that, or in the office rather, or anything like that. But Aframu, I think, relative to some of the other candidates for support, I think is a little hard to really know. Sword Art, I think if you're going to vote Sword Art into the top 3, you're making even bigger assumptions about his potential leadership role that I don't know about. Between Sword Art and Aframu, if they both have this kind of leadership role in helping the team click together, if you kind of set both of those aside and then look at just the in-game performance, I think Aframu is a little better and more consistent over the course of the split. So I ended up with him there. So those are my takes on those 3. Again, opinions are going to differ on this. The official ballot came out different than this. Obviously, FBI finished second team and Sven finished first. That was the only overall difference from my ballot. I believe who else was a little different? Huni got third team, not Fake God, but those were kind of the main differences. Let me just confirm here. Neo got third team. Sword Art was on third team, not Aframu. I think Huhi was another candidate at support, but I think he had too many off games. And Jensen too. I think that's one. That's an interesting one. Jensen, I think, did not have a good split pretty much at all. He didn't do much for me. His team fighting wasn't as good as Power of Evil, and historically his strength was he laned better than than pretty much any other mid laner. But this split, that wasn't true. He wasn't winning his lane as much. I don't know. I think to some extent it's that Core JJ was investing his efforts into top lane, and he used to invest a lot more effort into roaming bot to mid and helping out Jensen. That may have played into it a little bit. But you can't say entirely. I just think Jensen had a really quiet split and didn't impress me that much, especially relative to what I would expect from him. So I think Power of Evil did the same kinds of things as Jensen, but did them better. And I think Jizuke and Perks both played a better style with more positive and proactive influence in the game, which naturally generated more mistakes. And so I think Jensen coasted a lot without seeing a lot of mistakes, but that's because he wasn't really putting himself out there the way he needed to actually be influencing the game, especially the way the mid lane role is supposed to kind of influence the game these days. So yeah, those are my takes on my All-Pro ballot.